Hey guys, what's up? It's Darkmech here and welcome back to another video. Today, we're having a look at a pretty hot topic that's come from the latest alpha build, which saw the majority of offensive cooldowns being moved to the GCD. So if you don't know what that means, it's things like Avatar, Bloodbath, Battlecry or soon to be Recklessness in BFA for Warriors, Wings and Seraphim, True Shot for Hunters, Incarn for Druids, Adrenaline Rush for Outlaw Rogues, and so on. It is worth noting straight off the bat that defensive cooldowns have not been moved to the GCD. They are still off the GCD where they belong, but this has a fairly large effect on the way combat has felt for some time for DPS players. So I got asked by a few people to have a look at this and do a comparison of live versus alpha, and I thought I would use the Fury Warrior as an example, as it's one that sort of is largely affected by this. So what I've done on the live screen is I've set up my live bars in LVUI with the three large offensive buttons, fairly large so you can see them. And if I use a macro, you can see they all activate simultaneously like you would be doing when you set up for burst. If we go to alpha and we use the exact same macro, I can't actually change the bars because there's no add-ons in alpha, but you can see I've positioned them on the bars so you can see them. If I try and use that macro, it stops after the first GCD activation, and you can't actually even continue mashing it. You have to actually action them one after the other. Now, if you're a Fury Warrior and the rotation stays this way, you're going to be doing Avatar, Bloodbath, Recklessness. That's 3 GCDs before you actually start your DPS rotation. If you get an on-use trinket, which are also being added to the GCD, that's 4 GCDs you are wasting prior to actually starting your DPS rotation. So it's going to feel very different if this change lasts and goes into live. Now I'm actually a mixed bag on this one, and I was very against it to start with, but now I'm a mixed bag. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and provide some feedback from both sides over the forum posts that I've read, and then I'll give my input at the end. But what we're going to do to start this off is we're going to start with Watcher's post. Now Watcher made a post on the alpha forums when this went live, and I'm going to read it out to you. So from Watcher, the global cooldown was so named because it originally was nearly universal. In the early days of WoW, virtually all abilities were on the GCD, with some of the only exceptions being on the next swing attacks like the old Heroic Strike and Mole, which didn't have an immediate effect when activated. For melee players, especially with the most instant abilities, the global cooldown was the metronome that governed the rhythm and pacing of WoW combat, including the Agile Rogue being able to act more quickly than others. But over the years, more and more abilities have been taken off the GCD to the point that depending on class, spec, and talent choice, it's possible in Legion for some classes to have 10 plus abilities in their spellbook that ignore the global cooldown. Recently, we took a step back and surveyed the landscape of what did and didn't respect the GCD, looking to justify each of these decisions anew. This process is still ongoing and further changes may come. Aside from setting the overall pacing of combat, abilities being on the global cooldown can create potentially interesting choices. If you're in an arena match and are low on health being melee attacked, but so is your target on the enemy's team, do you use your next GCD to try and finish off your opponent, or to get yourself out of harm's way? That's a nuanced decision, where a skilled and experienced player is more likely to be intuitive and make the right decision, or make the right read of the situation. If your defensive escape tool is off the GCD, then there is no decision, you simply do both. But on the other hand, taking something off the GCD improves responsiveness and opens up avenues of reactive gameplay. Until Wrath of the Lich King, most spell interrupts were on the global cooldown. Back then, someone tasked with interrupting a boss, say Reliquary of Souls in Black Temple, was notorious in this regard, would often stop using any abilities at all when it was their turn in the rotation to interrupt, lest find themselves on cooldown and unable to interrupt. That's technically a decision, but more of a nuisance than a satisfying choice. Similarly, trying to use Lay on Hands to save the day in response to a sudden dip in your tank's health, only to have that spell fail to cast because you'd executed a standard part of your rotation half a second prior, simply felt bad. We have no plans to put either of those abilities back on GCD. This brings us to a broad category of abilities that are off the GCD in Legion, offensive burst cooldowns. These are almost always pre-planned and not generally used in response to an unexpected situation with them off the GCD. Talenting into such abilities often just becomes a matter of adding another line to a burst macro without any additional gameplay as a result. In endgame raid and dungeon situations, stacking all possible cooldowns has an outsized impact on someone's total performance, while in PvP, the fact that major damage amplifiers can be applied simultaneously with an outgoing damage ability, e.g. Battlecry, Recklessness, Avatar, Mortal Strike, heavily limits counterplay and makes worst case burst damage more severe. Thus, we're putting most activated offensive cooldowns along with on-use offensive trinkets back on the GCD. We will tune these effects around this change. See example the increase to the duration of Recklessness in the latest alpha build. Abilities like Elemental's Shaman Stormstrike have demonstrated that an offensive cooldown that takes the place of another spell and even has a cast time can still feel very potent. Finally, while we wouldn't make a gameplay change solely for this reason, there is some additional upside to being able to better telegraph the activation of a major cooldown via animation and visuals. For example, Battlecry Recklessness has a Warcry animation associated with it, but in practice that visual is virtually never seen since it's usually overridden by an attack animation a millisecond later. When you are used to a specific ability being off the GCD, there is some learned muscle memory that will make for a jarring experience when that changes. Or abilities that have always been macroed together may now need to be split out into two separate keybinds. Thus, we realise the initial reaction to the change are likely to be a mixed bag at best. But we are making these changes with an eye towards long-term improvements to the pacing and feel of combat as outlined above. Please play around with these changes and let us know what you think. Are there any specific cooldowns that we've changed in this build that feel especially bad? Are there any abilities that are still off the GCD but don't need to be? So that was Watcher's post, and I tried to read it word for word and I still ended up throwing words in. I'm sorry. Now feedback has already come in waves. There was 10 pages within a couple of hours of this. One of them was shamans crying for Bloodlust to be off the GCD, with people making a point that if you are the only resto shaman with Bloodlust in a group or a raid, you have to make a choice sometimes in regards to keeping people alive or using a GCD to activate Bloodlust, which buffs the whole raid. And that's fair. Lots of people saying that this will be a fantastic change in PvP, as it will give you time to react, dispel, and introduce really good counterplay to heavy burst setups, which I fully understand, and I get. And this change feels very much a PvP change than PvE. And lots of people are just plain old hating it. They're just plain old hating it and saying it's going to make combat feel clunky as all hell. Now, as I said, there's been 10 pages on the alpha discussion, and majority of it is fairly negative. Over on the arena side of things, people seem to be really enjoying this and rejoicing that Swifty's one-shot macros will be dead. I'll be honest, as I said, this really feels like a PvP-centered change. I'm not really fond of it straight off the bat. Being a tank, it doesn't really affect me. I definitely noticed on the Paladin with Wings and Seraphim, or on the Druid with a large pool going for an Incarn Thrash spam. But from a tank standpoint, it doesn't affect me. From a DPS standpoint, I would be pretty triggered though. This to me, in a lot of ways, ruins the fluidness of combat that we've got in Legion at the moment. So, but I don't know. It may just be something, as Watcher says, you've got a lot of muscle memory around that. It may be something we need to give a chance to see how it feels. But in regards to a flowing combat rotation, I think it pulls away from that. And I think Legion did a really good job with legendaries and things like that to really create fluid, flowing rotations. So yeah, I'm going to be very interested. But there's the comparison of what it's like from live to BFA. Let me know if you're a PvPer, are you really happy about this? And I fully get it from the PvP side of things. This really does give you a chance to make decisions in PvP. From a PvE standpoint though, I don't know. I don't know how you feel about this, especially as a Fury Warrior who has those globals to line up at the start. So let me know in the comments, guys. Thanks very much once again for checking out the video. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. See you guys.